Let me just quickly, you heard the introductions. We have Timnit, Paula, and Eddan. We want to make this also interactive at the end, so we'll do some rapid fire questions. We don't have a lot of time, and then we'll jump into the questions that you have. There's an app called Slido, so please enter your questions there, and I'll get it on the side pad. Let's start with some rapid fire questions along the area of where is innovation and AI happening within each of their companies, new areas that they could talk about that most people might not know about and you think could be exciting to talk to them about. And also tell us about what you're most worried about with regards to what you see in AI. And I assume that will not be in your company, but up to you. Timnit, why don't you start and we'll go from there.
Oh, okay. Can everybody hear me? Is my mic? Oh, yes. Okay. It's on. So where are the innovations happening in machine learning?
And specifically for you and Google that you can talk about that you're most excited about.
So personally, my background is in computer vision and in machine learning, and right now I don't know what to call what I'm doing. I'm focused a lot in transparency. So I don't know if this is a later question, but personally, I actually think what I really want the community to focus on, and that we're starting to focus on, that I'm happy about, is just basics, not new algorithms, not like, we have a fixation in my community, my research community, with new models and like new state of the art, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're starting to go back into like looking at data collection methods and like the biases that enter that, documentation. So in my background, I used to be a hardware engineer before, and we had a lot of documentation and process, black box testing, and how to present, black box documentation with models and stuff. So it's not stuff that's like really glamorous, but that's personally what I think is most important, and that's the work that I would like to support. What I'm most worried about, I mean,
we'll pick one thing.
Within Google or outside, when I started working in this area of ethics, fairness, whatever, it was very, very hard to convince people that this is a thing, that this is a research thing that people should work on. Now it's become a hot thing, which is, people come to me and they're like, oh, that fairness is like such a hot area. Or I see papers like, GANs are hot, fairness is hot, like GAN fairness, GAN, whatever, So that's the kind of stuff I'm really worried about. I am actually worried about, a lot of times people in marginalized groups are the people who are at the first groups of people to face the consequences of these things. And so my collaborator Joe Bolamini and I, two Black women, wrote this paper called Gender Shades on how automated facial analysis tools had high error rates for different for darker skin tones, and now there's all sorts of regulation on face recognition because of that. But it took us to write that paper, right? Because we were firsthand experiencing these things, and I worry about this swooping in and coming in and kind of sidelining marginalized groups when they're talking about their worries about ethics and fairness, not listening and working and collaborating with them. So people call this helicopter science, or we see it in international relations too, where people who are not in, let's say, developing countries going and trying to save the people in developing countries without kind of working with the researchers. They're actually collaborating there. So honestly, again, I know my background is technical but the things I find I'm worried about right now these are the things I'm worried about.
Great. And let me skip around just to make it exciting and to keep you guys on your toes. Eddan, how about you?
We don't actually make stuff at the World Economic Forum. We bring groups together to talk about policy. So the one area I'm most excited about, there's a project I work on called Generation AI, and it's about the impact of AI on children. And I think the technology within that I keep learning about is the ability to tailor learning to people with different kinds of learning habits or disabilities. And those projects that are proposing to do that in a way that also is privacy preserving in regards to the tracking necessary for that, I think would be a really exciting thing with with big impact on a generation that's growing up around this stuff. In terms of what worried about, I think, again, with stuff that on the policy level, the part where I don't think there's any actual agreement on, the lethal autonomous weapon systems, and the fact that there's, I think, as far as I understand it, stalling at the UN level with any kind of agreement across countries. I think it's concerning what may happen to that without any kind of agreement.
Great. Paula?
Yeah, so one of the big thrusts of what Salesforce is doing with AI is an intent to democratize it, right? And so providing tools that are, in some cases, low code or no code to be able to deploy our AI products. And so there's a couple of things that we're doing that I'm super excited about in that capacity. One is, we've got a whole backlog of ethical features to enable our customers to make sure that they're using these tools responsibly. So for example, a feature we released earlier this year enables customers to see like, okay, hey, you've got a data category that appears to be looking at zip code, which can be a proxy for race. Sure, you want to do that. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about our commitment to scale up jobs, right? We just recently committed to creating 1 million jobs for people without necessarily college degrees to get into tech. And when you think about the whole conversation about AI, hyperbolically destroying tons of jobs, part of democratizing technology is democratizing access to technology, and including for people from non-elite backgrounds. One of the things that there's so many things that are also worrying, or from an ethical perspective, Timnit is stole my thunder on facial recognition, and she is the expert on that. I'll say the thing that affects me most personally is the algorithm that keeps me addicted to my phone. I don't know how many of you guys have kids, but I have a 3.5-year-old daughter who frequently says to me, "Mommy, no phone," right? So we sometimes think about the ethical implications that are way out there in the future, but there's stuff that's affecting us here and now.
And Paul, let's kind of continue with your experience at Salesforce. So, how do you think about kind of the ethical frameworks that you create? How does that instantiate itself in the products generally that Salesforce builds? But also, if we have an audience of people who are entrepreneurs, they may or may not be Salesforce customers, but they're building their own products. How do they think about? They can't afford a chief ethical and humane officer. How should they be thinking about some type of framework or some type of resource that could help them not make some unintended mistakes?
Yeah, great question. And I will say, before I came to Salesforce, I spent many years investing in early stage companies from a mission-driven lens. And I think it's one of the most important things that you can do when you're starting a company or investing in an early stage company, to be thinking about not just the good that you're trying to create in the world, but what some of the stuff that might happen, whether or not you intend it to happen with your technology. What we've created at Salesforce is a broad, sweeping process, essentially, to both integrate these questions into the early stage of how technology gets designed, and we're just starting to do that. But also to enable employees and stakeholders to raise concerns about how technology is used. Lots of channels that we've created for employees to raise red flags. And then we've created a council that includes both external members, internal members, frontline employees. We sit there and debate those questions, and in some cases change policy around those questions. So, no matter at what stage you're at in the development of a company, you can tailor the level of effort as appropriate to this stage, but it's never too early to think about it, because it's a lot harder to change the direction of a massive company than it is when you're early and nimble, and you can actually design this stuff really into the core architecture of the products that you're building.
Great. Let me switch gears a little. To me, everybody in this room uses Google. We trust that Google does the right thing. We hope it does the right thing. But what is the framework that Google uses to decide what's right and wrong, and who makes that decision? And for you, as somebody as a researcher, there's certain things that are probably easier to comply with. what are the more nuanced things that are actually very hard for the engineers to make sure they're not tripping over something that they shouldn't?
So, so Google is like a huge place, right? And so I'm a research scientist, and I run a small research team called Ethical AI Team. So within our research team, we try to come up with certain kind of either some technical, model. I hate the term debiasing, so I'll say ways of mitigating bias in the model side, or analyze some sort of what's happening in the data, etc. But one of the big things we're doing right now is, like I said, trying to institute process. So we, for example, have created a series of papers, right? One of them is called Data Sheets for Data Sets. The other one is called Model Cards. I know you guys are. So I love, in this field, in this area, I think it's really important to have industry-wide things and collaboration, right, rather than competition. So that's why I was looking at her, because I know that at Salesforce, I've been talking to a lot of people at Salesforce who are trying to institute the same things we're doing. So the idea here is, like Paula was saying, it's really hard to change what a large company is doing, right? But one of the things, and if you come, I used to be working on product teams as an engineer, and if someone just comes to you and says, hey, like, this thing is not fair, make it fair. And you're like, well, how does that fit into my whole, schedule? I'm not gonna, get credit for like killing a product because it's quote unquote unfair, So what we're trying to do is have a process by which people, just simply document their data sets, their data set creation process, et cetera, for transparency, unintended use cases, intended use cases. So one thing I found out from my prior paper with Joy for gender shades was that basically, so I want to touch on a couple of things. This paper, like I said, looked at automatic gender recognition systems, and the fact that they had high error rates for darker skinned women versus almost no error rates for lighter skinned men, right? And the first thing we did after that is to see all of these models, pre-trained models that are released from different companies and what kinds of information they have. So you have a model that can be used by law enforcement, you have a model that can be used by judges, you have models that can be used across many, many different sectors of the industry, right? And but like each of these models have to have different kinds of characteristics, right? Like so, what kind of information are you giving people so that they can make informed decisions about whether or not they can use a particular model or not? What kind of information are you giving them about the kind of data sets you're using, right? Like, is your data set just trained on people from 25 to 35, in Palo Alto or whatever? And then so if you don't give me that information, I don't know if I can use this data set for a particular thing or not. So believe it or not, I always say this is kind of the wild, wild west. We were in a position where none of this information was ever available. And so we're trying to like have a company-wide and industry-wide process where this push towards transparency happens. The second thing I want to say is that...
Is there a name for this industry consortium that
for example,
is trying to set a standard?
So I know that like there's a bunch of efforts going on. So within Google, we're working a lot on making model cards and data sheets, and data cards, which is another thing, not just a research effort, but like something that really comes out with Google products. But then the partnership in AI also is doing something based on model cards and data sheets. So, and I believe IEEE is also thinking of a standardization, and the EU is also thinking about model cards as a standard. So for me, this is great because I think this is an industry-wide problem, and I think there needs to be collaboration. The second thing I want to say is that a lot of times when we talk about this issue, we kind of focus on bias and then say, and kind of focus on equalizing some sort of accuracy metric or something else across subgroups. But there are things that just shouldn't exist. So the automatic gender recognition tool that I just talked about from certain groups, from certain companies, a lot of people have, especially in the trans community, have written about how harmful these automatic gender recognition tools are to the to many communities, but especially to the trans community. So a lot of us believe this particular tool should not even exist, right? So at least at Google, we haven't released a automatic gender recognition tool. And the way you arrive at this, what's really important to arrive at these kinds of conclusions is who's at the table, who's at the decision-making table. You can have ethics board, you can have great process, you can have whatever, but if you're not representing groups of people who are the most vulnerable, who will be most negatively affected by these kinds of things, then no matter how great your process is, we're not going to come to the right solutions, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And part of that, part of the issues is that again, the government comes into play, with some of these biases and what tools should be there and what tools shouldn't. And the World Economic Forum takes a very strong role in trying to bring together, as you mentioned, multi-stakeholder environments and really bringing the private sector and the public sector together. And so, Eddan, if you could talk to what you see there, what is the right role for the government, and who's best practice in the world today, whether it's a country or a state or a different country outside of the U.S. Who do you see as the best at this?
Sure. Well, I think we've seen lots of examples of AI ethics initiatives. We actually had someone help us count them across the world. Back in May, it was at 180, and now I'm sure a lot more. We're trying to think about ways to implement these ethical initiatives, these principles, and one of the ways that is particularly relevant to government is in government procurement. And when the government is buying AI, and when the government is decided that that kind of solution is appropriate, we're coming up with guidelines. We're in a later stage of it. It'll be released publicly open for comment, and will be piloted in the United Kingdom and United Arab Emirates and Colombia before the end of the year. And it gives guidelines on what kind of questions should be asked, what is the data governance expectations. We try to get to not just the unintended consequences, I would say also, I think we need these days to be concerned with the unanticipated consequences, whether or not they were intended, and be able to ask the kind of questions that can lead to be able to look at it and analyze it further down the line. The multidisciplinarity of teams is some of the guidance that we propose, in addition to other things, including being able to look through the funding channels and being able to secure those, which we are all learning is more and more important, to think through all these ethical implications. And in terms of governments that are far ahead, we've actually been very impressed and have learned a lot from Canada in terms of their efforts in regards to government procurement in particular, being able to bring the industry together and setting out channels through which procurement can happen and attaching a multi-stakeholder process from the beginning and deciding on that. We'd like to say that what will come out of the UK is great, but that's because we were a part of it. Yeah, there's all sorts of examples that I don't think at this point we're just figuring out how companies are implementing it, and we'll be able to think through later.
And for all of us in this room, where maybe we have we kind of operate in U.S. laws, and maybe for some even the California laws. What are you seeing there, and anything that this audience should know in terms of either what's coming down the pipe or what's been legislated that might touch on these issues?
I think we should all be thinking about facial recognition and how that gets implemented. We've seen a lot of activities in California, in cities of San Francisco and Oakland, and I would pay attention to that. I also think all of the issues for the long term, we need to urgently now think about bias, as has been said by everyone on this panel, so that problems don't get worse later on. And then I think what happens with the California Privacy Act is something we should pay attention to between now and when it gets passed, to see how it may change and how it can relate to the overall GDPR direction that the world is going in.
So there's hiring, I always give this example in my talk, so I just won't name companies anymore. But there are, startups that interview. So what they do is they kind of, instead of recruiters looking at your resume, lots and lots of resumes, they have automated tools looking at those resumes to figure out who should be, considered for an interview versus not. But on top of that, they also have people recorded on camera during their interviews, and then doing emotion recognition on them, and then giving that information, additional information to the potential employer, which is, I'm very much against this kind of thing, because first of all, even emotion recognition, like I'm very careful to say, I want to talk about not internal state. Like I'm in computer vision, and I can't understand how people think that like you can infer internal state using vision. But also, even if you could, like emotions are extremely private. So the whole thing. So in the U.S. we're not catching up to like some of these things that are going on. Like every other, there's another company where they were trying to use replace time cards with, again, emotion recognition type stuff. Because I keep track of a lot of face recognition type things, and what they wanted to do, the hope was once they can in aggregate analyze people's sentiment, and so like, are people happy in this company versus not, et cetera, et cetera. So this is sort of like tracking people, workers, like surveillance, right? So there's a lot of stuff happening, even I'm saying in the U.S., right, without even going all the way to China. Which the regulation hasn't caught up with.
Let me, we're in a kind of presidential election cycle. One of the topics that comes up, there's a lot of topics that come up, but one of the topics that comes up is job loss due to AI. And, so I'm not going to pick somebody to answer. We'll see who volunteers. Is that an ethical consideration? If an AI in the pursuit of doing something good causes jobs to be lost, and is it different if it's one class of jobs like taxi drivers and truck drivers versus looking for skin cancer, and maybe we don't need doctors to look at skin cancer anymore or look at X-rays anymore because the AIs do it better and you get better health outcomes. Is that an AI ethical issue, and if so, is there a way to address it, or does it just become an issue that is out there? Anybody want to take that bomb that I just lit?
I can say shortly. Yeah. I think it's absolutely an ethical issue. It may, in fact, be one of the most important ones, right? And it's in large part, it's like on all of us to think about that, because there's no doubt that there's tremendous disruption ahead, even if the conversation has been somewhat hyperbolic. There's no doubt that we need to be thinking about who has access to this technology, whose lives are disrupted by this technology, whose jobs are and livelihoods are disrupted, right?
Who's supposed to think about it? Because there's a potential tragedy of the commons issue, and so in your view, is there someone who should be an owner of thinking about these issues?
I think there's a group that was just convened in California, the Future of Work Commission, that was brought together, and it's important that it be a public debate. I hope that it's not just about upskilling. I hope it's about continuous learning. As you said, it's not just one particular sector of the economy. It's at all different layers, and I think there's some guidance that we need to think about. There's that aspect of work and the things we engage in life that involve human judgment. If we can still sort of preserve that at all the different layers of jobs that we have, make sure that we actually protect that and not just happen to leave it over to not be covered, would be a good way to respect people's integrity and dignity in work in the future.
I'm kind of going back and forth between some of my questions and the audience questions through the panel. Let me go back through to one of the audience questions, which brings us back to the maybe more technical side, which is, you talk about bias, fairness. A lot of these algorithms are black box. They are becoming more complex. And so how do you address that issue of being able to audit, what is an increasingly complex black box? And it's only going to get worse. Maybe, Timnit, if you want to talk to that.
Yeah, I can briefly touch on that. So I think that you audit a black box by sort of answering certain questions about it, right? Like you might not know how it got about to a particular, result, but you want to know when you query it, you want to know what the result is, right? So You want to know for just simple things. You want to know what the false positive rate is on by different groups, by different subpopulations. What's the false negative rate? What's the false positive rate? You know, for intersection, breaking it down intersectionally for, you know, darker skinned women from this age to this age, you know, lighter skinned men. I'm just giving certain specific examples. Even simple things like that they're not information that are available right now. And so for certain kinds of applications, certain metrics are very important, like false positive rate on a particular demographic, false negative rate on a particular demographic. So that's just a simple example I'm giving. So in our paper, for example, the first paper we did, which was an auditing paper, we wanted to make sure we audited black box commercial products that people paid for, because we wanted to know what exactly was available. Training data information was not available. We had no idea what kind of, you know, we could guess because we're researchers, what kind of models they were using. And then we wanted to know, you know, people say socio-technical systems, right? We wanted to know how people were using it. We wanted to know what kind of documentation was available. So I'm a huge proponent of auditing, black box auditing in that sense. But then also, of course, people are working on more interpretable methods. So, you know, there's many different kinds of works on, you know, interpretability and like how to interpret some of these black box models, which is a different line of work.
Yep. Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking the panelists for a good discussion.